Hi guys, and welcome to the Stephen King Sematary Club. We are wrapping up Christine today, so we're going to cover all of part 3. Dennis and Lee have started kind of meeting in secret and conspiring. They're concerned about Arnie. They are trying to figure out a way to save him, and in the process they are falling in love. So Dennis feels bad because Arnie is still his best friend and he's moving in on Arnie's girl. Arnie also dropped Lee, although he still wants her. One of the big things that they discuss together is that Arnie's signature is now the same as LeBay's signature. Dennis had gotten a hold of something where LeBay signed it, and he compared it to the second signature that Arnie did on his cast, and they are the same. So it was kind of an obvious thing with the way that such a big deal was made of the fact that Arnie's signatures were quite different, and you naturally assumed that his signature was resembling Roland LeBay's. Dennis makes New Year's Eve plans with Arnie, and he tries to discuss things with him, and he finds out that Arnie is just pretty much LeBay. Quote, "Somehow, dead or not, LeBay was in him, and LeBay was taking over." Page 422. So Arnie is getting swallowed. LeBay is taking over his body. He is, in essence, possessed by this dead guy, which is interesting because I don't know how that all works. Like, why did Christine become evil? Why is LeBay able to manifest? There were no rituals, there were no like passages of the soul from one being into the other. When LeBay died, Arnie didn't dig him up and perform some sort of weird resurrection thing and then, got taken over by LeBay as a result. It's very bizarre that LeBay seems to have some sort of agency after death. But maybe we're not supposed to ask that. Arnie is under the impression that he and Lee are going to get married and have kids and be happy and probably have this like 1950s Pleasantville existence. And never mind the fact that Lee hates Christine, doesn't want anything to do with Christine. She is upset with the way that Arnie just kind of cast her off, and it's just not reasonable for Arnie to think this way. But LeBay wants Lee, and that's what Arnie thinks. Dennis ends up talking to George LeBay, the brother, again, and there's a secret that comes out that originally George LeBay wasn't going to tell Dennis because he's, an outsider and it's kind of dirty laundry, as it were. But Roland may have killed 2 people in his youth. These would have been childhood rivals who angered him, and then he found ways to dispose of them. It's also mentioned that Rita was put back inside Christine, and she died inside the car, not on the side of the road. And Veronica may not have committed suicide. It may have been Roland killing her. Dennis and Lee are still sneaking around. They can't really tell Arnie because he'll flip out, and they can't really do anything until the Christine problem is solved. They can't go public. So while they are sitting in a parking lot, Arnie happens by and he sees them and he knows. So they got a little bit careless, and Arnie freaks out and is super angry. Dennis confronts Arnie, who is now just full-on possessed by LeBay, and he sets a trap for him at Darnell's garage. He tells Arnie / LeBay to meet him there and bring Christine, and he would bring Lee. And Dennis has arranged to get into the garage. He rented a large truck, which the only large truck that this guy ends up having is a septic tank truck thing that sucks out septic tanks. So he has to drive this huge rig, and his leg, because it's I don't know anything about non-automatic cars, but it is a manual car, and he has to use both both legs, and, his injured one, he has re-injured, and it's just one of those things where it's another roadblock, which makes things interesting, but he ends up having to use a broomstick as a way to push down on the car thing, much like Speedball Tucker, Jim Croce used a broomstick on the throttle. I'm guessing that's the same exact concept. Christine has her own devious plans, and she waits outside the garage. As soon as Lee is visible, she goes after her, and she kind of chases Lee around the garage, and Dennis is having a hard time making the truck go and do what he wants. But he ends up smashing Christine a lot, and Lee manages to escape, barely. And while they're waiting for the police, Christine starts knitting herself back together, so they have to crush her even more. So they crush her until she's just nothing. Quote, I looked at Christine, only it wasn't Christine anymore. It was a spread out pile of twisted, gored metal, puffs of upholstery, and glittering broken glass. Page 512. And in the meantime, Dennis had told Arnie's father not to confront Christine or Arnie or anything like that, and to get over to Lee's parents' house, and they would all hang out together with Dennis's parents. And something happened. Christine ends up killing Michael, Arnie's father. So during this chase scene in the garage, there are just all these corpses that appear, and Arnie's father is one of them. Then we find out that while all this is happening, once Christine finally starts dying, once it's the end of the road for her, so to speak, LeBay jumps out of Christine and tries to re-enter Arnie, who isn't having it. He's driving with his mother to a college, and they end up crashing into a large truck on the highway, and both of them are killed. So in the span of just a couple hours, Arnie and both of his parents are dead. There is a state police inspector who Dennis talks to in the hospital, Richard Mercer, and Dennis tells him the whole thing, tells him all of it, and Mercer sees to the crushing of Christine himself. He gets two guys to crush her into a cube, and one of the guys gets a very bad cut during this process. Quote, Mercer suddenly smiled. It was the bitterest, coldest smile I've ever seen. He said it bit him. Page 523. Talking about the worker who crushed Christine. And time has now passed, about 4 years. Dennis has tried asking Mercer what happened to the Christine cube, where it went, and he gets no response, which makes him wonder if Mercer is still alive. And then we get a nice little wrap up in the form of Sandy Galton guy, the one who operated the toll booth that let the boys into the parking lot to beat up Christine. He had fled. Like, as soon as people started dying and he didn't want to be caught with that group of boys, he left and just ran away. Well, there's a newspaper article that Dennis reads, and a guy with the same name out on the West Coast was killed by a weird hit and run. So some car rammed into the movie theater where he was working, and he obviously tried to get away from it by going into the projection room because he had the key in his hand. He was going to open the door and hide, and it killed him. So now Dennis is kind of concerned that that's somehow Christine again. Quote, of course it's impossible, but it was all impossible to start with. I keep thinking of George LeBay in Ohio, his sister in Colorado, Lee in New Mexico. What if it's starting again? What if it's working its way east, finishing the job, saving me for last? His single-minded purpose, his unending fury. Page 526. And I love that wrap-up. I think it's so good, with the fact that he's not sure it's Christine, but there are all these people that Christine is kind of pissed off at, and she would definitely be working her way back, trying to kill all these people. It has a little open-endedness that I appreciate and I like. So, where I do find this to be an interesting reread, it was good to revisit because I'd only read it one time, and I do find it good and somewhat scary. A car can inflict serious damage, But I do think I like the short story Trucks more, when all the Trucks decide that they are going to run on their own and kill everyone and take over. It's not necessarily scary because it seems that Christine doesn't just wantonly murder. You have to have wronged her or LeBay or Arnie in some way. So it's not as though it's an indiscriminate killer, which, you know, like a Jason Voorhees or something like that, going around killing indiscriminately. That's more terrifying to me because there's no logic to it. But all in all, a good story, and we will begin Pet Sematary next week, which is one of my absolute favorite Stephen King novels. Just one of my favorites. So, see you next week. Have a spooky day.